being some left-wing political hack activity, which on its face is just ridiculous. There's nothing about, first of all, you guys know what I feel about the left-wing, right-wing narrative. It's a narrative. It's bullshit. And to think that this is one party, and he's said that several times, that this is the Democrats, apparatus, which clearly it's not. So I will continue to lose my shit on those particular points. But other than that, obviously extremely pleased that this information is getting out there. But I'm going to say something else here. There are groups of people behind the scenes that most of you guys are unaware of, that are on like Friday evening Zoom calls or Thursday evening Zoom calls, or have a group DM behind the scenes, much like Trump Frog put together. And if you're in one of those collectives sharing information behind the scenes, and you have somebody among that group that has specialized in this exposure, and then one of the people in those groups that have a very large following goes out and finds some fly-by-night other big account that just happens to make a post about something that you spent the last 2 years posting about nonstop, it's very frustrating. Very, very frustrating. Because as I have always said in this space, my rule of thumb when, early on when we were trying to build an audience, Bridget did all of the homework to find out how to maximize the reach of our account. I'm not here for myself. I'm here to educate people on things that I feel passionately about. I literally get no benefit from spending 12 hours a day compared to what I could have. So yes, do we bring in a few dollars because we have a verified account? Yes. You would be disingenuous not to say that. Bridget, Cousinette, and I share that because we collectively do the work. But believe me, it's nowhere near compared to the money that we expend on the research part of it, as far as the books and all that other stuff goes. Okay, so early on, people would come in to these, not the spaces, but into the account going, oh, please follow me. Oh, please follow me. And I would love to follow everybody. But Bridget assures me that what that does is minimize your reach. There is and I didn't make the rules. There's a ratio of people that you follow to those that follow you to maximize your reach. And I explained early on in our journey that we were going to use the parameters that they set up. I don't agree with them, but I'm going to use them. We'd be stupid not to. And anybody that engages with us on a regular basis, because that also expands your reach, we will follow with my account. Because if you are going to interact with us and provide us information, like I know a lot of people that do, like Carrie and SR71, and I don't think anybody reposts my stuff more than Seaweed Sally. I don't think anybody does. I know all of you repost my stuff. She reposts just about every post to like 20 different accounts. She's amazing. And that's not what I expect of anybody. I'm just saying, I'm looking through the people that are here, Tara, all of those people. When you engage with us, we follow you. because that's how you expand the reach of the account. This has nothing to do with me, Bridget, or Cousin It. It has everything to do with reaching people, because you guys understand you are in a completely different position as a result of being here every day, learning all of this stuff, where today, are you leaving, honey? Yeah. Okay. Hold on just a minute. I got to say goodbye to my grandbaby. Love you, baby. I love you. I love you. Okay, I'm back. All right. So just because we have so many new people here, I wanted to take the opportunity to do that and understand that the whole key to everything is engagement, and that then perpetuates the reach of these programs to people, to get more eyes on this information. And I posted earlier, I want you guys to be my eyes and ears. There are a lot of accounts out there that have recently started talking about the CIA, and they gained some street credibility by doing so. But I've noticed some of them more and more are now shifting, not talking about the CIA, but focusing exclusively on the military component of this. And as you guys know, I am not making apologies for the role that the military played in all of this, because it sickens me. But at the same time, I'm not going to ignore the fact that the majority of the military's actions were based on CIA, quote unquote, intelligence. And so if you go down to some place like in the 1980s into the Sandinista area and the Contra area in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, and the CIA is telling you that behind every tree is a communist, then when you kill the people behind the tree, you think you are acting on intelligence that is valid. What we now know is there were no communists down there. And everybody that the SF people trained people to kill, the people that the CIA trained to kill those people, and potentially even our own military killing those people, either with air support or whatever, we're not killing communists. And that is through no fault of their own, because at some point you have to be able to trust the intelligence that you're being provided. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind as this ball picks up speed rolling down the hill. So you guys know I just did a real quick refresher today, a two-part thing on and obviously we've talked about the USAID in every single one of these operations. They are the foot soldiers. They hire the union people that pretend to be union people that infiltrate the real unions in these countries. And then they basically feed the information to the CIA paid media saying that the real people trying to work for workers' rights are communists. The infiltrators go, oh no, we're the better union, blah, blah, blah. So it's everything. It's the chamber. Remember, the chamber comes up with all of these sub-chamber organizations, and every country has one. And then the USAID and National Endowment for Democracy gives them money. The USAID gives every foundation in the United States, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, all of them, gives them all money. They all act as fronts for the oligarchs, the international syndicate that goes down and basically uses that to overthrow governments. It is a hive. It's a collective hive operation that descends upon innocent people in unsuspecting countries and overthrows the country because of an oligarch's desire to monopolize a particular resource in that country. And USAID is not chump change, but it is a piece of a much bigger pie. And that's what I was trying to articulate in the two-part mini series that I put out today. So we are going to ride the wave of the exposure by weaving in all of the research that we have done as it gets exposed. And we will take anyone to task that is trying to either minimize or shift blame as to what's being exposed. So we're going to keep them on their toes because we've already done our homework and we continue to do it. Go ahead, Stellar.
I had one quick question. I tagged you in a post where the man was talking about a Discord server where a lot of the secrets were on there. I guess they weren't like really, really big ones, but it was a guy who was, anyway, did you guys see that one? If not, I'm going to hunt it down because that was one that I needed you guys to look at because it was through Minecraft. You guys talked about that kind of stuff with games and how they communicate with each other as well.
I don't think I saw that.
I did see it. And I know what you're talking about, and I remember when that happened. And it's actually not a recent, the event they're talking about is not a recent thing. I remember when it happened. No, it's only been in the last year or two. When someone in the military, essentially a 21-year-old, I think that was his age, was playing game Minecraft on his government phone or computer. And when he started saying, "You guys don't know what this is talking about, I've got all this security clearance," and then he went ahead and screenshot posted a bunch of documents. I believe it had to do with the Ukrainian. No, wouldn't you say? Stellar, come on, help me out. Was it Ukraine or was it Israel?
It was between the two of them. It was Ukraine and Israel.
Right.
And it was, yeah. But it was like from before. It was from before when they were doing the coup and how Israel was paying for this stuff.
Right. And in my opinion, because I remember when it came out, this is an example of your DEI at work. This is bringing someone in with security clearance, because I'm sure as the colonel can attest, to get security clearance, these people have to go through a rigorous, including psychological evaluation that would have never put this man in this position to start with.
Honey, wait a minute, Bridget. The psychological evaluations, unless you're going for a compartmentalized or obviously working for the CIA, normal military does not go through a psychological evaluation because no one would have a clearance just about.
Well, this was a man, I think it came out of the Pentagon, didn't it?
Yes, it was through the Pentagon, and I don't remember which high-ranking officer he worked with, but it was kind of like they thought that he sounded like he was kind of like a stoner kid, but I don't think he was a stoner kid. He was really bright, and they just kind of kept him in the corner. So all he did is play Minecraft, and then somehow got to discussions within a Discord channel and just started.
Yeah.
I thought that was recent. I didn't realize it was so long ago. But yeah, he was an intern or worked at the Pentagon. But yes, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. Let me see that. I don't recall that. But I worked at the Pentagon. I had a TSSCI clearance and I never was psychologically evaluated.
Well, but there is a certain, what's the word I'm going to put? Responsibility that the general people in that area would have. And to be allowed to play on games on your computer, first of all, and that the whole thing just really reached to high heaven. However, anyway, in this case, he ended up leaking classified documents.
Well, unless they had someone specifically network his computer, you cannot access normal games, especially in classified areas. You can't even access anything that's not on a classified server. In a normal office where you may have like, because the classified stuff that has the highly sensitive information on it, like in my office at the Pentagon, the first 2 years I was there, I did classified work, but I had a removable hard drive. So, because I had to do both, I had to correspond in a non-class environment with other commands that was down channel of the Pentagon, not classified information. So you put your unclassified hard drive in, and then when you needed to access the documents that for my job that I was doing, which was all classified, I had to take the unclassified out, put the classified hard drive in. Then you could access the material that you needed to do your job. But you could not access anything on the unclassified network, which is where game stuff is. So there's no way that you can do both. You have to be on an unclassified version of the computer. Now, obviously, while I was on the classified version, there's a classified printer. Once you print something, then you have to do all of the recording of it and putting cover sheets on them and doing all of that other crap until they're disposed of. So it's a very cumbersome process if for most people that well, for all people that deal in those environments, if you are going back and forth. Now, when I was at CENTCOM, the entire thing is a skiff. You can't take any of your shit in that's not classified. And the entire thing is a classified area. So the computer that I worked on didn't have a removable hard drive because the only thing I could do, because everything we did was classified. Now, if you needed to send something to the Air Force on an unclassified system, you literally had to go to one terminal in one corner of about 50 cubicles, and it was the only unclassified terminal that was in that entire area. Again, they make it extremely difficult for you, and there was nothing attached to that terminal. You couldn't scan shit in, you couldn't take pictures, you're not allowed to have your phone anywhere in the building. So they try to make it as difficult as they can for people to do shit like that. That doesn't mean, because we did have 2 airmen that was arrested for taking laptops that were classified out of the building without a hand receipt. So it's not to say it doesn't happen, but anyway, go ahead, Stellar.
Well, supposedly it was on a Discord server. So like Discord is another, I guess, social media thing where people get together. And he's got it all in there. And they were saying that it wasn't TikTok that had the security breaches. It was actually through Discord. And not to be surprised if the CEO of Discord doesn't get called into these hearings, because apparently there was quite a few things that were leaked off to that thing. And they're all put into channels, apparently.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but in order to connect to a Discord server, which is an unclassified server, you would have had to have been on an unclassified machine, and they are so incompatible with sensitive or classified information. You're going to be doing a lot of shit in order to make that happen, which in most cases, in most environments, would be very obvious to the people around you that you were doing shit you weren't supposed to, which is how the 2 airmen got caught. Anyway, let's get started with our material for today, and then we're going to chit chat at the end. All right, so keep in mind where we were at. We're talking about global reach. We are talking about we went a little bit over the Phoenix program in Vietnam and President Johnson and all of that other stuff. And then we got up to, on the late afternoon of March 7th, 1969, Richard Nixon helicoptered out of Langley with Richard Helms to address senior people at the CIA in a large auditorium. As in common previous ceremonial pep talks, the president painted the role of the CIA in glowing terms. Quote, "I look upon this organization as not one which is necessary for the conduct of conflict or war, or call it what you may, but in the final analysis, one of the great instruments of our government for the preservation of peace, for the avoidance of war, and for the development of society in which this kind of thing would not be necessary, if necessary at all." Unquote. So, however, we know what Richard Nixon's involvement in covert activities were during his vice presidency to Eisenhower. And of course, that didn't stop once he became president. So the president was probably referring in his comments at Langley to the CIA's role in supplying intelligence reports called estimates, and which in many times the whole purpose of the estimate was to lead or to justify a false flag that would eventually lead to a war. So Richard Nixon also said, quote, "I think the American people need to understand the need for this foreign policy option," unquote, meaning covert options. There was little hope in 1969 that the public attitude toward covert operations would ever be as permissive as when Nixon had been vice president, and which of course was before the Bay of Pigs and Vietnam, which kind of soured everybody to those types of things. Controversy had sharpened in 1967 with the realization that the CIA funding for Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and a variety of other youth, labor, media, nonprofits, and public interest groups, all of which were used for CIA fronts. In Nixon's first days in office, the generous termination grants CIA gave to Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty began to run out. Nixon supported continuing those funds, and new funds were openly appropriated by Congress for 2 years. But by January of 1971, Senator Clifford Case of New Jersey detailed the secret CIA funding of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and announced legislation to make them independent units funded directly. So, again, you can't have independence if you're funding them. Both Nixon and Kissinger worked on the legislation, which passed Congress in 1972, providing the radios with $36 million the first year. The funds were administered by the Secretary of State, and all CIA connections were cut, except the CIA or the Secretary of State is an extension of the CIA, so that's bullshit. Indirect connections remained, to include the crossover of the people. One nation to feel the weight of Nixon's covert action was Iraq, and even more so the Kurds in Kurdistan. This secret war involved basically the U.S. doing a favor for the Shah of Iran. The Kurds were oftentimes referred to as nomadic people, which, by the way, is bullshit. I was in their cities. There was not anything nomadic about them. They had regular big cities like we do. A federation of 40 tribes who desired nationhood. Yeah, they wanted the nation back that World War II did away with, because they had a nation. They were spread across the borders of Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. As early as 1948, a CIA estimate observed the mountain tribes, known as the Kurds, are now and will continue to be a factor of some importance in the strategic estimate of the Near East affairs. Now, that just means they're going to use them. For those of you who don't know that history, and he went on to say that periodically the Kurds had fought the Turks, the Iraqis, and the Iranians in their quest for freedom. Shortly after World War II, Kurds had cooperated with the Russians in setting up a republic, which was, and again, this author is completely ignorant. There was an actual country called Kurdistan. It's on maps. Okay, after the 1958 coup in Baghdad, the Kurdish autonomy seemed threatened by the Iraqis. The tribes took the field again in a partisan war in which long campaigns alienated the opposing forces. You had Mustafa Barzani, a tribal leader since 1945 that led the main forces. And finally, from sheer exhaustion, the Iraqis and Kurds reached an agreement in a 15-point settlement in 1970. Peace might have reigned except for Iran. The Iranians had several border disputes with Iraq, including one over the Tigris River, which had changed course in such a fashion as to put the main shipping channel used by the Iraqis into an area claimed by Iran. No friend of Baghdad, the Shah feared the end of the Kurdish war would bring a more direct confrontation between Iran and Iraq. So he was not adverse to stirring up trouble. The Shah offered the Kurds money and weapons to resume their fight with Iraq. Dissatisfied with Iraqi implementation of the settlement, the Kurds were tempted, but they didn't trust the Shah either. Barzani countered that he would consider the offer only if the U.S. guaranteed that the Shah would not be allowed to suddenly cut them off. Tehran passed the Kurdish request on to the U.S. Nixon and Kissinger made an official visit to Iran in May of 1972. Immediately after the Moscow summit, at which the first SALT agreements were reached. In Tehran, John Connally, a political associate of Nixon's, told the Shah that the U.S. was willing to help the Kurds. The CIA handled the American side from their station in Tehran. Kissinger set up the Washington apparatus for the Kurdish secret war. His military aide was Colonel Richard Kennedy, who met with one of Barzani's sons and with the CIA on the Kurdish request. A staff assistant by the name of Alfred Atherton, Atherton Jr., became the NSC focal point, much like Oliver North would stand in later in the Iran-Contra. At first, the CIA provided $1 million of captured Soviet equipment and munitions. Later aid was raised to $5 million and ultimately a total of $16 million. The Israelis were also helping the Kurds and had been doing so since 1965, which again is consistent with what we find out, that anytime there's arms needed, Israel is only too happy to help. These involvements were dwarfed by the Shah's contributions, which was several hundred million. Armed with this assistance, which began in August of 1972, the Kurds raised 100,000 troops, a force larger than Barzani had ever fielded before. The Kurds engaged large Iraqi forces, including their 65,000 regular army troops, with 500 tanks and 200 guns. 14 months later, the Iraqis were allied with other Arab states in an October war with Israel. So Israel's funding both sides again. 2 Iraqi armored divisions and parts of 2 infantry divisions were deployed into Syria, almost half of Baghdad's total armed forces, seeking to take the pressure off of a Syrian front. Israeli paramilitary advisors suggested to the Kurds that now was the time for a big offensive against Iraq. Barzani thought this was a good idea. The White House, unfortunately, did not. On October 16, 1973, Kissinger instructed the director of the CIA to tell the Kurds not to attack, and Barzani followed orders. Because again, their whole idea is not to actually win a war or win any objectives. It's to keep the war going, dead bodies, and more munitions sold. For the Shah, the Kurds were but a card to play in his dealings with Iraq. After the October War, Tehran and Baghdad bridged some of their differences, leading to an agreement in March 1975. Simultaneously, the Shah halted his aids to the Kurds, stopped free passage for CIA arms shipment, and closed his borders to Barzani's men. The next day, the Iraqis attacked the Kurds. On March 10th, the Kurds sent an anguished appeal to the CIA. Our people's fate in unprecedented danger, complete destruction hanging over our head. No explanation for all of this. We appeal to you, the US government, to intervene according to your promises. Barzani also sent a personal letter to Kissinger, who was by now Secretary of State, in addition to an SC advisor. Quote, we feel that the U.S. has a moral and political responsibility towards our people who have committed themselves to your country's policy, unquote. The CIA station chief in Tehran, forwarding the Kurdish appeals, asked if Langley had been in touch with Kissinger's office on this matter. Further, he warned, quote, if the U.S. does not handle this situation deftly in a way which will avoid giving the Kurds the impression that we are abandoning them, they will likely go public. Iran's action has not only shattered their political hopes, it endangers the lives of thousands, unquote. Kissinger made no reply to Barzani's appeals. The CIA station chief, who had offered options for actions and advised it would be the right thing to do, was left holding the bag. Pressed on the abandonment of the Kurds, the senior U.S. official retorted to a Congressional Investigation Committee staff, quote, covert actions should not be confused with missionary work, unquote. Bastards. Columnist William Safire slyly hints that the callous official was that no one other than Henry Kissinger. Ironically, a decade later, in the 1980s, the United States would switch sides and discreetly favor Iraq in a war against Iran. The Kurds, who survived their crisis in 1975, as well as a military campaign led by Turkey and Iran, are still firmly in place in northern Iraq, a greater threat than ever to Baghdad, and now a people who have no reason to respect American interests at all. Barzani died in 1979, but his sons and their allies live on and have long memories. Barzani, Barzani, was one of the guys that came to a dinner to honor General Garner when I was there. I actually have a picture of him, one of the sons. Another nation to experience the CIA covert option was Chile, in the southern cone of Latin America. An American ally for many years, proud of its traditions and the centuries of democracy, Chile had not had a coup since 1925. A candidate by the name of Salvador Allende succeeded in his third try for presidency to attain the presidency in September 4th, 1970. To Nixon, Allende was something like a Castro. The election of Allende occurred despite the best interests of the U.S. operatives, both political and corporate. $4 million had been funneled into a Christian Democrat candidate, Eduardo Frei, from the CIA in 1964 elections, which Allende lost. Looking ahead to the 70 campaign, the National Security Council special group approved another $700,000 in CIA funding from 69 to 70. John McCone, now representing private interests as the chairman of ITT, increased the secret election fund to defeat Allende to over $1 million. Okay. And what happened to Bridget? Did we knock her out? Bridget, if you wouldn't mind putting up McCone's bio in the notes, because he is a key figure. So ITT, again, stands for International Telephone and Telegraph. They had the monopoly concession on owning both the entire telephone system of Chile and their telegraph, which they used to spy on the country. ITT also coordinated its election plans with the CIA, including meetings between top company officials and Western Hemisphere Division Chief William Broe, B-R-O-E. Anaconda and Kennecott corporations, fearful of them losing their concessions on the copper mines in Chile, also added money to the election fund campaign against Allende. It was supervised by the CIA station chief, Henry Heckscher, Hecksher, and Ambassador Edward Corry, Korry. While there were some tactical differences on how the funds should be spent, they all agreed that it was to prevent Allende. Now, I find it interesting that all of the same documentation that indicates that ITT and the copper mining people, which eventually turns into Freeport mining through some acquisitions and consolidations, every single document that you pick up that talks about ITT and the copper mines also talks about PepsiCo, but for some reason, this author just conveniently leaves them out. The common thread that links the action in Chile with many of the other covert actions is the threat of nationalization of American-owned concessions in these countries. That is true with Cuba, Guatemala, Iran, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Brazil, every one of them. Allende insisted that there was a peaceful road to achieving the renegotiations of the concessions, even if it included the eventual turning it over completely to the workers, so that it was at the exclusive benefit of the Chilean people, offering to pay money for it, the whole 9 yards. The CIA's intelligence estimates before and during the election projected that Allende had a 50-50 chance of winning, but they agreed that his victory would have no effect on the global balance of power. None of the developments in Chile came as any surprise to Washington. The National Security Council Special Group considered strategies for Chile 4 times between Nixon's inauguration and Allende's election. Meetings that, in fact, approved the money spent by the U.S. during the campaign to prevent him being elected. In other words, interfering with their election. In too many other instances, Kissinger blamed the bureaucracy for allegedly opposing intervention, while Ambassador Corry was consistently warning of Allende's candidacy, and the CIA for being too complacent, though Richard Helms, had also told the special group as early as the spring of '69 that action had been prepared soon if the U.S. was going to take sides in the election. Kissinger defends himself with this statement, quote, "Had I believed in the spring and summer of 1970 that there was a significant likelihood of Allende's victory, I would have had an obligation to the president to give him an opportunity to consider a covert program in 1964 proportions, including the backing of a single candidate. I was resentful that this option had been foreclosed without even being discussed." In other words, he's basically saying he was blindsided, which is ridiculous. In fact, according to the special group minutes, Kissinger told the covert action managers more than 2 months before the elections, "I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go, quote unquote, communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people." Allende's victory in September was not a sweep. His popular unity movement achieved a plurality, but not an absolute majority, throwing the election into the Chilean Congress, where the final vote was set for October 24th. But the first round election result threw Washington into a frantic panic. Kissinger goaded the CIA and state for action, even though that he remarked to Chilean diplomats the year before, "I'm not interested in doing anything about any of this." The National Security Council's advisor acted in response to Nixon, who was distraught at the thought of a quote unquote communist nation in the Western Hemisphere. It did not matter that Allende was not a communist. Some years later, in a celebrated television interview with David Frost, Nixon rationalized that the addition of Chile to a Cuba profile would have made Latin America a red sandwich of sorts, like the domino theory happening even though he wasn't communist. On September 15th, Nixon met with Augustin Edwards, a publisher of the conservative Chilean newspaper. And you're going to see another remarkable similarity that I posted today in the Venezuelan situation, where these quote unquote communist countries all of a sudden have free press. It's so weird. And about the only mention of PepsiCo in this that I remember is right here. It says, Augustin Edwards, who is the publisher of the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio, an associate of Richard Nixon's friend Donald Kendall, who ran PepsiCo. Edwards' foreboding were such that Nixon felt driven to act. So supposedly Nixon's justification for orchestrating a coup that ended up killing tens of thousands of people was because a Chilean newspaper man who basically was funded with US dollars had a problem with Allende. That's the story they're going with. So Nixon, let's see, the CIA director Helms and Kissinger were called in to discuss the possibilities of how to play hardball with Chile. The CIA could have $10 million if needed in order to ensure that the Senate in Chile did not confirm Allende as the president. And Nixon also ordered the CIA to make their economy scream. In other words, the whole normal economic warfare in order to starve the people. Hopefully they'll get out on the street and overthrow their own president if they're hungry enough. Helms would later say President Nixon came down very hard in favor of attacking Allende. Okay, on September 18th, the CIA director Helms was back in the Oval Office with a plan, and his chief of covert actions, Thomas Messinens, let me spell that last name, Karamessines. The special group had considered on September 8th and 14th a concept for maneuvering around the Chilean congressional vote. Helms did not believe that this would work, but the ambassador thought that it would. The secret CIA program would be an effort to induce a military coup as the backup option. The backup option was discussed at Langley, and a special task force was set up for the CIA in case it was necessary. A propaganda expert and Chilean specialist, David Atlee Phillips, which we've talked about many times, was called on by Rio de Janeiro to head the task force. Heckscher was informed that Santiago's military attaché, a Colonel Paul Weimert, W-I-M-E-R-T, was going to be the go-between, but otherwise the 12-man CIA station was going to be bypassed other than those people. Instead, the agency sent in 4 officers to handle direct action. The ambassador was left to believe that the first option was all that the CIA was basically interfering with the congressional vote. The second option was not briefed to the ambassador, according to this author. The CIA contacts encouraged certain Chilean officers to assassinate the commander of the Chilean Armed Forces, General Rene Snyder. This action created a backlash in Santiago, and Salvador Allende was confirmed as president 2 days later. The Snyder assassination occurred about a week after the White House halted a plan. Well, this author thinks they halted the plan. They did not. Kissinger would like the public to believe that that was the end of the deal. The CIA station chief testified, quote, "As far as I was concerned, what we were told to do was to continue our efforts, stay alert, and to do what we could to attribute to the eventual achievement of the objectives and the purpose of the second option. I don't think it is proper to say that the second option was ended," unquote, because it was not. And that's where the grayness of the plausible deniability comes into effect. You know, then they quibble and lose track of the fact that we overthrew a government and tens of thousands of people died on who knew what, as opposed to you all going to jail. All right. So the task force remained in place. Covert action funds were further approved, indicating that there was not a stop to the operation. And an additional, in 1964, almost $3 million, $3 million was approved in 71, which they were comparing it to the money that they spent in 64, which was significantly less because they stopped him before he got into office. Allende, that is. They spent another $3 million in 1972 and $1.7 million in 1973. The CIA actually spent the money that the special group approved, let's see, to overthrow Allende on September 11th, another date they love, 1973. To get some idea of the relative increase of the amount spent, consider the case of the newspaper, long considered a friendly source by CIA, whose task force leader, Dave Phillips, had worked for in his early days in Chile. The newspaper subsidies from the agency quadrupled during the Allende years for the covert actions, because this is how they money launder. Heckscher, who was against Allende but had also warned against the Chilean military, was replaced in Santiago by Ray Warren. Ambassador Corey was also replaced with Nathaniel Davis, because these guys, they're about ready to install Pinochet, and these guys are the sadistic horror managers. Economic assistance was halted. USAID funds dry up. The U.S. prevent loans to Chile by multinational governments. They stopped the flow of money from the World Bank. They were not allowed to loan Chile any money. They basically turned off all U.S. banks from loaning under penalty of losing everything else. So no money for Chile at all. American actions polarized the political situation in Chile, turning the middle class against Allende, which was the whole purpose. President Allende did his best in the economic difficulties, but he eventually made mistakes and sharpened the American hostility, because once you call someone a communist, there's no going back. The unrest began to increase, and the USAID brought in their national, what would eventually become the equivalent of the National Endowment for Democracy Union slush fund. So they now have union instigators that are out getting people, encouraging people to get on the streets and strike. And they keep instigating like what we saw in 2020 in the street riots, where they got truckers and port workers and all of those people to strike. So basically shutting down Allende's economy. The trucker strikes were the catalyst for the last dramatic action. A decade after, it is still impossible to say how the truckers were able to sustain a year-long strike. Well, I'll tell you how. We found that out in many other CIA operations, because they funnel USAID money through a million NGOs, and they pay the people that are on strike basically their same wage for being out in the street and not doing their job. So the author does acknowledge that most people believed that the strikers, i.e. truckers, were financed by Americans through Brazil NGOs. The State Department and CIA, of course, denied this. And David Atlee Phillips, who was back in Washington in 1973, following, he went to Venezuela, which we know they did that in Venezuela. Okay. Despite the widespread chaos, Allende's popular unity scored major gains in Chile in March 1973, 8 more seats in Congress for a plurality of 43%. Allende's own share in the vote in 1970 had only been 36. Until 73, the armed forces remained quiet under the strict leadership of a General Carlos Pratt, P-R-A-T-S. The Loyalist forces crushed a coup attempt that June 29th. 2 months later, dissidents within the armed forces surfaced in the form of a demonstration out in front of Pratt's home, and Pratt resigned. He was succeeded by Pinochet, who led the military coup September 11th, 1973, and became chief of the ruling junta. And Salvador, they basically stormed the presidential palace and murdered him, threw bombs in there. Kissinger and Nathaniel Davis asserted that Allende created the opposition himself, which is a bold-faced lie. American money fueled a drumroll of Chilean press criticism, just like they've done everywhere else in these coups, and made it possible for the coalescing of groups like Fatherland and Liberty and blah, 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 which spearheaded the anti-Allende forces, which were all made up by the CIA. Former Ambassador Corey estimates that this led to 9 different assassination plots, including one against Allende himself. Moreover, the outcome in Chile ultimately hinged on the attitude of the armed forces, and it was made abundantly clear to the Chilean military that the U.S. friendship was not to be had by supporting a constitutional government, nor apparently was the U.S. military innocent of involvement in the coup itself. American military attachés were in the field with Chilean army units participating in the coup. Several naval vessels were off the coast of Chile, and one of those ships is reported to have landed a Navy SEAL commando team in Chile. As part of the same maneuver, the U.S. had deployed 32 aircraft to a nearby Argentine base at Mendoza. Finally, on the day of the coup, the U.S. electronic intelligence aircraft was over the Andes Mountains. It was variously reported that there had been relaying communications, both of the coup plotters and recording them for the U.S. intelligence. This last action in particular would have been impossible without some forewarning, of course, which tells you everything that you need to know that it was a planned coup. And by the way, remember that Chile had crypto AG. The U.S. military or the U.S. CIA knew every single thing that was being communicated in and out of Chile. They owned the telephone and telegraph companies, and they knew every single thing going on inside of Chile. The Pinochet junta immediately declared a state of siege and began a tremendous campaign of repression because he was a dictator who had been trained by the US Army and CIA at the School of Americas in exactly how to torture, kidnap, and murder his own citizens. So, at least 2 American citizens, Charles Horman, Horman, and Frank Teruggi, Teruggi, died at the hands of the Chilean military, along with the Chilean citizens, unofficially reported anywhere from 20 to 25,000, but there was a lot more. The U.S. government made little effort to seek explanations, apologies, or compensation to the families of the dead. Americans, before recognizing Pinochet's junta on September 29th, 1973, 3 years later, in 1976, Pinochet reached directly into the U.S. to assassinate Chilean exile Orlando Letelier, who was the former ambassador to the U.S., in a car bomb, which also killed Ronnie Moffett, who was walking beside him because she was his aide. And also, Charles Carlos Prats and his wife were gunned down in Buenos Aires in 1974. The guy who resigned after being intimidated that allowed Pinochet to run the army and effect the coup because he was a witness. Nevertheless, Richard Helms was obligated to testify several times in 1973 to the Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chaired by Frank Church, who was exploring the U.S. actions in Chile. Always loyal to the chain of command, Helms prided himself on learning to get along with presidents and denied in sworn testimony that the CIA had tried to overthrow the government of Chile. 4 years later, Helms was indicted for perjury in this testimony. He pleaded no contest to the charges, pronounced guilty, and was let off with a 2-year suspended sentence and a fine of $2,000 for murdering a foreign head of state. That resulted in 25,000, at the very least, murdered innocent souls. It is instructive that, forced to acknowledge the CIA's involvement in later congressional investigations, Kissinger, in his memoirs, continues to berate the bureaucracy for inadequately implementing orders that he initially refused to admit was even given, because he's a fucking liar. Okay. Let's do the rest of a few minutes over. For more than 2 decades since the inception of covert operations during the Truman administration, it had been assumed that certain duplicity went with the territory. This was at the very essence of plausible deniability, but the rationale for deniability was to prevent knowledge of covert operations from becoming available to those nations that figured as targets of such things. It was never intended to deny decision makers and their involvement in the United States government. That's bullshit. That's the whole purpose of it. Since the inception of covert operations, the problem of controlling them has been an interesting one. We have seen the efforts of Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. Nixon, too, made a few changes. One participant in the 1968 Council for Foreign Relations Symposium has described the 303 Committee as moribund. According to Kissinger, change came not for this reason, but because of the 303 Committee was identical to the 1969 news story, and we can't have that. Again, Kissinger's account is less than straightforward. In fact, the reconstituted special group was expanded to include the Attorney General, John Mitchell. Nixon's Attorney General was a close friend of the president's, and it was likely that he was added to the special group as the president's personal representative for plausible deniability, because Nixon didn't entirely trust Kissinger, which makes you wonder who appointed Kissinger. Was he there for another reason? The answer to that is clearly yes. The change was formalized in February 17, 1970, in Nixon's National Security Decision Memorandum 40. The special group had thus begun labeled as 40 Committee. The National Security Decision Memorandum also rescinded National Security 5412-2, the one that we know authorized assassination based on being a communist. In Nixon's directive, quote, I have determined that it is essential to the defense and security of the U.S. and its efforts for world peace that the overt foreign activities of the U.S. government continue to be supplemented by covert actions. Under the -40 memorandum, the special group was responsible for policy approval of all major and political sensitive covert action programs, including those suggested by departments other than the CIA, for the Joint Reconnaissance Schedule and an annual review of covert programs. Now, Joint Reconnaissance Schedule, for those of you who don't recognize those terms, is so like in Florida, we have in the Gulf of Mexico airspace for air-to-air combat practice for fighter pilots. We have some down in the south, south of Miami, off the coast by the Keys, and we have some on the East Coast. And those blocks are blocked out based on longitude and latitude, and they're actually numbered. Like the one I flew in was block 465. I'll never forget that. That's designated for air-to-air combat down south of the Keys. So there is a similar schedule for reconnaissance missions that is aggregated at the national level, because you have, like back when we had the SR-71, you had the U-2, those flights based on what certain elements in our national security infrastructure needed looked at was then elevated to this scheduling body so that they could schedule the U-2s during their normal flight to fly over, so they gathered everything that everybody needed. And so that's what they're talking about, the Joint Reconnaissance Schedule and an annual review of covert programs, because now they're going to be covert programs and actions in more than just the CIA. To fulfill its role in planning at the CIA, the area where covert actions was set up, there was a missions and program staff to develop the justification and objectives for the 40 committee approval of new covert actions. And it says a new covert action staff was replaced. They replaced the previous psychological and paramilitary operational staff. So it's going to have a new name. Having carefully set up the framework, Nixon and Kissinger proceeded to ignore it as often as they wanted. Alexis Johnson, a 40 committee member who represented the State Department, wrote, quote, it is true that during the Nixon administration, the president and the CIA bypassed the committee on sensitive topics, unquote. When Nixon gave his first go-ahead on Cambodia, he ordered Kissinger to say nothing about it to the committee. Every one of the special group to the Secretary of State was deliberately cut out of the second option of overthrowing and killing Allende. Similarly, the 40 committee was not consulted on the matter of the Kurds either. Among the decisions that can be tracked to the 40 committee, those on intelligence collection figures predominantly. Overhead and satellite reconnaissance missions and the Glomar, Glomar, explorers' attempt to raise a Soviet missile submarine from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Those all got discussed, but none of those are covert actions. When in 1972, they decided they were going to spend $10 million to interfere in the Italian election, that got discussed at the 40 committee. Kissinger was the chairman of the 40 committee. He set up meetings and agendas and assisted by a single staff member supplied by the CIA. Only principals were allowed to attend. so your deputy couldn't go for you. Henry was the ultimate arbitrator. The first official manual on covert operations prepared by the CIA in 1972 observed that only about a quarter of them would be considered by the 40 committee. Excluded were many of the operations that they determined was sensitive. So the ones that went to the 40 committee was basically for show because they were just minor, unsensitive ones. One technique used by Kissinger to minimize the committee's impact was to have as few meetings as possible. He liked to poll the members by phone, and if they didn't like his idea, he wouldn't have a meeting. Beyond the question that could be more important to national security executives than running the nation's covert actions, it cannot have escaped notice that Kissinger's NSC, that phone calls permitted fewer records being kept. Avoiding meetings also prevented the kind of give and take among members that may articulate well thought out reasons why what Kissinger wanted to do was a dumbass thing to do. Richard Nixon lost his ability to wield any power, even as he tried to concentrate it in the Oval Office. Watergate is an ugly name for the Nixon years, a product of his 1972 reelection campaign. Watergate is important to the CIA because of the break-in team was comprised of Bay of Pigs veterans, the Cuban exiles like Bernard Barker, but CIA officers like Howard Hunt was also involved. Agency security specialist James McCord Jr. was also caught in the break-in. When it was revealed that the CIA had furnished material assistance to Hunt, they had prepared certain psychological profiles on Americans at the request of the White House, and that virtually the same Watergate cast had carried out other illegal break-ins on White House instructions. The CIA knew it had a major problem. General Vernon Walters, who held the post of CIA director from 72 to 76, spent a great deal of his time in the intelligence community coordinating the defense of the CIA during the Watergate investigation. This period was also a time for secret warriors. The man chosen to replace Helms was James Schlesinger, a defense analyst with no intelligence experience other than his work on the Secretary of Defense staff after only 5 months at Langley. But in the short time, he presided over some important changes. Within the agency itself, Schlesinger was convinced that much of the deadwood lay in the plan's directorate. Personnel figures began to fall as about 1,000 officers resigned, or were fired. Many of those men had been paramilitary specialists, covert action, which we've already talked about all of this. Another change initiated by Helms was continued under Schlesinger and consummated by his successor, William Colby. This concerned the major air proprietaries like Air America and Southern Air Transport. A former owner of this freight line negotiated for the purchase and offered $5 million. The purchase was approved by Helms during the last month in office and confirmed by Southern Air Transport's board of directors. And basically what most people believe, because this is basically when the covert actions officers are being fired, is this was basically just the offshoring of the air component because it continued just under CIA fronts as opposed to the CIA itself. So don't think they're actually doing anything, because they're not. They're just shuffling the deck. So other air freight companies objected to the sale, and even one tried to buy the airline that Southern Air Transport bought for $5.6 million for $7.5, and they turned it down, which tells you they were basically just moving it. Colby ordered further liquidation, and there were some repercussions when the former owner himself got involved in basically violating contract provisions. And in the course of lawsuits, the CIA officially admitted actual ownership of Southern Air Transport and was awarded a judgment of $1.3 million for a total of $6.9 million on the sale. So the CIA liquidated Air America all by itself. By 1975, the parent company, Pacific Corporation, had been reduced from 11,000 employees. Think about that. 11,000 employees for a CIA air company, down to 1,000 people. Air Asia, guess where Air Asia's at? If you guessed Taiwan, you would be correct. So, Air Asia, the massive Taiwan aircraft maintenance facility, courtesy of William Pauly, was sold to E-Systems, a Texas corporation. The proprietary planes and other assets were sold off. The church committee was informed that the liquidation would be complete by 1976 and was supposed to generate $20 million. These changes progressed under William Colby. Later, Colby was appointed and then confirmed as the director. During his confirmation hearing in the Senate, there were basically wanted posters that sprung up overnight on the walls all over Washington with a adaptation of the Phoenix program, which of course William Colby had ran. And they featured an ace of spades used by Americans in Vietnam to connotate death or killing with Colby's face on it. The director made sure that the CIA's Office of Security did nothing about the posters. Colby's agency still had global reach, but its grip was not as strong. And that finishes chapter 15. So that's crazy shit. All right, let's open up the floor. Oh, my Chilean expert is here, Illini. Welcome to the floor, Illini.
Hey, Colonel.
Hey.
Interesting, neat space. I wouldn't call myself a Chilean expert. I've read the Corn and Blue book. It's a really good resource on this, and I posted some replies to your thread with some resources on FOIA documents and other academic sources, as well as the Nixon tapes, basically backing up a lot of what you're saying here. Number one, people are going to ask, why wasn't this on the Nixon tapes? Well, it was. There's a call from Nixon to Ziegler, his press secretary, asking about the situation with Ambassador Corey, Chile, and ITT. It's about a 1-minute tape. They did discuss it. And then there's some FOIA documents on there, too, about the false flag, killing of General Schneider. And the fact that they blamed it on the communists and used that to search other areas. So we have the federal government's own word here via FOIA documents that this is really what actually happened behind the scenes. But you also you can understand the hidden model in that context by realizing that Chileans didn't understand what was going on for 30 years until we finally declassified this in the early aughts. So it's some of the stuff that we've been involved in is truly fascinating. You probably remember more than I do about LBJ's interference with U.S. aid in Chile too. I think you've mentioned that too, and that might be worth comment on given everything that's happened today.
Oh gosh, you're gonna make me my brain's in a completely different.
Sorry, we'll table. I'll post some. I'll post some stuff to the nest to give people some resources.
Yes, please.
They can go investigate this stuff for themselves. But you got the Nixon Library. You have the Nixon websites. You have FOIA documents, all backing all this stuff up, so people can make their own decisions on it.
Yeah, and obviously, those of us like yourself. I mean, and again, I deferred to people, and I am happy to recognize you have done a lot of legwork. When we first talked about Chile way back when we were doing our world tour, your introduction of the Nixon tapes and your thorough knowledge of the ones that that was just amazing. It blew me away, and that's the reason why I consider you so well read on the coup in Chile, and I really, really appreciate you adding what you are posting as well as the words. The stuff that we bring to you guys are all well documented. We are not making shit up. But anyway,
One of the interesting things about the Nixon tapes isn't what's on there, it's what's not on there, including the national security redactions for ITT. That should tell everybody something right there. It isn't what, it's not what's in the financial statement sometimes, it's what it seems like they deliberately omit that sometimes gives you a hint as to what's really going on. And the same thing is true for the Nixon tapes.
So what you're saying is ITT was redacted from the tapes.
They specifically say on the tapes, we're redacting this because ITT is mentioned. I mean, that is an omission by the federal government right there. I'll try to find that one too. I think it's in one of my threads that I've replied to here. I mean, that tells you something if it's in an official government document.
That's fascinating. And do you recall any mention of Pepsi or the mining companies?
I don't, but people can always search easynixon.org. I haven't thought to search for that one. It's a good thought.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind posting the website down there so people will have that as a resource when they come back to this. I think that's incredibly important. Okay. Anybody else got anything?
Can I jump
They
in?
still suck.
Go ahead, Bridget.
My God, I love watching them dismantle USAID. I'm sorry. I am really enjoying this way too much, even though they may be calling it things that they're not. And I was going to ask your opinion on, do you think some of the things, because a lot of research is being tagged underneath Elon Musk's post, are they doing this intentionally the same way as I believe Trump has called attention to certain areas about different things?
That's obviously a possibility. Again, my only concern in the whole thing is the reference that it's a Democrat thing versus, and using the term far left because they don't use that term appropriately. You guys know I'm opposed to using left and right term. If you want to call the USAID an organization that implements international fascism, I will agree with that. But that's more of a totalitarian kind of government. And again, I don't like using the words left and right. So in the terms in which Elon Musk is using it, he's making it appear like it is only being done, which the people refer to the left as being Democrats. Again, that's kind of a reiteration of a talking point, which is false. Everybody was given a piece. As a matter of fact, I'd make this argument. Of the four organizations, and you cannot separate, just so that you guys know, they are two separate entities, but they do the same job. The National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID are basically two peas in the same pod shell. Okay. In the National Endowment for Democracy, when they set that up in '83, it's set up for slush funds. You can articulate that two of them strongly aligned to the Democrat Party and two strongly aligned to the Republican. The one that was set up for the U.S. Chamber firmly aligns with the Republican. The IRI is Republican. You have the Democrat version of that, and then you have the union version of that. So basically, they were splitting the money in order to give everybody a piece of the pie, because those are the entities that are the centers of power when you're going to coup a government. You are going to use the labor element to incite the foot soldiers. You are doing it on behalf of a U.S. Chamber member, because that all of the oligarchs belong to the U.S. Chamber. Their companies do. And you have basically the Republicans and Democrats with their pet projects of regime change. And so they collectively all hit the ground running with the CIA. So you can't separate them in that way. And I want that fact driven home as much as we can. Carrie?
Agreed.
Carrie?
Yeah. So I sent you a tweet about Elon Musk asking if the IRC is legal. So there was something about Lindsey Graham is the head of it now. Mother.
No,
God.
he's on the board. He is not the head of it.
Oh, thank God. I was like, oh, well.
Well, at least the last time I looked at the website.
Oh my God. I think he was, Elon was saying something about that. But one thing I want to say is that this may be happening. I don't know. I know nothing. But there may be like a bit of Trump, like using that as a cover, like as a shield. The left-right thing, because the reason I say that mostly is because he used to be a Democrat. Like that's he was that for a long time. So he might understand things at a deeper level than we think, but I don't know. If you were going up against the CIA, the international syndicate, you need to cover your ass. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening, but, and I hate the left-right thing too with a passion, but I don't know. I don't know. What ideas do we have for him to cover his ass? I don't know.
Yeah. Southern? Southern, are you there?
Southern, can you hear Colonel Towner?
I don't guess she can. Can you guys take her down and bring her back up? Because I can't hear her.
Southern, there's the unmute button on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You may need to press that in order to speak.
I just sent her the mic again too. And Colonel Towner, that video I was talking about, I put it down in the purple pill.
Okay, thank you. So I did want to share, while we're waiting for her to come back up, I did want to share I wanted to comment on the video I did earlier about the lady that was here for our get together yesterday. I had a blast at the get together. If you guys haven't seen the post, we had a Badlands fan club meet up at my house yesterday. And one of the ladies came in and she was so excited to be there because Brian Cates and Dwayne Cates and General Quast was all there. And I had escorted her back to the back porch and she grabs my arm and she's like, I just absolutely love Alpha Warrior's show. And she goes, do you know who he is? And, you know, of course I had to laugh and everybody else just around us stops talking and looks at her like, are you kidding me right now? And I said, yeah, I know who he is. I'm on his show all the time. And then she recognized, I don't know how she didn't recognize me, but whatever. She recognizes me And she gets so excited and she's like, "Oh my gosh, you're here too. What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "It's my house." So I had a blast. The To me, the amazing thing about doing things like that, and having you get kind of filled back up with excitement, and there were younger people there, there were older people there, there's civic leaders that are there, and nurses, people from all walks of life from all over the state of Florida. Some people drove in from Jacksonville, which is like a 3-hour drive. A lot of people come up from the southern part of the state as well. And now they've started their own meetings in Jacksonville and one down in Fort Myers area, in addition to the one that we have here. And a lot of them come to the one we have here. And so it's just a fun way of kind of being around like-minded people and getting filled back up with the enthusiasm, because obviously on some days doing all this research kind of wears you out. Southern, go ahead.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. And thank you, Colonel Towner, for doing these. Now that we've got this hurricane under control, I won't be missing any of your shows.
Cool.
So I'm very happy. But I got to tell you this thing with USAID. I came across it because I was brought in by the federal government to help garner product around the world for PPE for the U.S. and then some of their allies. And I got to tell you, I kept running across USAID people trying to play games and do some interesting things out there. So I did a deep dive on them. This is not left and right. This is the old Democrats and the old Republicans and the games they played. And this thing is a huge monstrosity that has happened. This thing was done for good intentions in 1961 by John Kennedy. And he did it through an executive order. So I'm listening to Chris Murphy and all these idiots out there screaming about what Trump and Elon are doing. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to put your name on the list. You're either part of this or you're currying favors, because they're all revealing themselves. And that's important. We need to know who we elect, and we need them to be in the sunlight. So what you do, Colonel Towner, is huge for us, because we didn't get this kind of history in class. And we really need to know our history so that we know how not to make these mistakes moving forward. Because I got to tell you something, the Democrat Party especially, they still think their Democrat playbook is working. We're just sitting there laughing at them. We see you, but they're going to keep using their old tactics. But that's just an aside note. But I'm just realizing now, history repeats itself. And what worked, they continue to do the same thing. They weren't looking for new ways to do things because it was still working. And that's what we now know. We have their blueprint. So now we can go find it and stop this. I'm tired of this type money. Less than 10% actually gets out there to help people. And I am tired of the corruption and the misuse of our tax dollars. Look at what we could have accomplished in doing the right thing. So that I'm excited about. So I will step down. Thank you again.
Sure. I when you said that about, I was going to go back and get a quote. Actually, the entity called USAID was set up in 61 by Kennedy, but it was actually melded from 3 other organizations. And I was just going to go name the 3, and I realized someone's been on their page rearranging everything, because now it's even got the Donald Trump doing away with it, blah, 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 and moving it under the Secretary of State. So they've changed some of the history here, because it had listed one of them was called something security assistance, economic security assistance, or something like that. Mutual aid, and then another thing, because USAID, if I'm not mistaken, used to be like USID or something like that. I'll find it in a one of these books, because I've come across this a million times, because we actually were doing this long before 1961. But John F. Kennedy in 61 kind of melded like at least 3 of the entities into creating the USAID. And believing obviously that it was supposed to be for good purposes, but anytime that you're giving money away for free, just like we found out with our own welfare program, you are always going to have fraud, waste, and abuse, and we should never be doing it. Okay, so Money Penny, go ahead, and then we'll go to Illini.
You're right on my question. Hello, by the way. USAID. Now, you see, I follow this organization throughout COVID because I was very friendly with Dr. Andrew G. Huff, who's a veteran and was head of, he was one of the directors of EcoHealth Alliance, which was the intermediary company between the NIH and the NIAID and what was happening with COVID effectively. And everything was funded by USAID. In fact, I've just dug out a document in front of me. This is the Pandemic Predict Program, which was $100 million donated by USAID for emergency pandemic threats. So I knew them in that capacity, and I didn't know much more about them, and I don't really. But my question is, so Rubio has just been appointed to head up USAID after this morning I was told, and I saw the headlines, USAID was cancelled. I don't understand what's going on, and why is it being moved under state, and how different is it going to be, and why is everyone cheering that Rubio is now running something that nobody actually wanted?
Well, those are a lot of questions. So USAID has ceased to exist as a quote unquote private, not private entity. It's gone. They took the functions of USAID and moved them into an existing office within the State Department to administer, because there's people out in the field. You can't just flip a switch and say, poof, you're gone. There's funding streams, there's appropriated money, there are USAID contracts that have to be closed, administered, shut down. There are people that have to all be moved. We have there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world on USAID.
Yeah, 7,000.
Yes.
They're on a demonstration at the moment, apparently, outside their building in Washington currently as we speak.
Yeah, so those people all have to be given the opportunity to return to the United States. So there is a lot of administrative red tape when you shut down a government organization that has to occur. So Rubio was not put in charge of USAID. Their functions were put under an existing office at the State Department for them to administer the administrative pieces of shutting it down. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, except the headlines still say he's heading up USAID.
Okay, but that's from the media that lies about everything. They are moving they're moving the function under the State Department. Now, because
so my question is, what is their function? Because I only know it from a pandemic sponsoring of bioagents and dangerous viruses perspective.
Well, they do that same thing in every field, Money Penny. They fund the bullshit medical stuff. They fund the bullshit political stuff. They fund the bullshit educational stuff. It's literally every facet of life in a foreign government. They fund gender care reaffirming literature. They fund the corruption of education. They fund gender studies in foreign countries. They literally go to every single country around the world and fill it full of garbage, bullshit, cultural destruction. That's their job.
Is it? Okay, it's not meant to be aid as in giving foreign aid to anybody.
Hell no. They don't even give the countries anything, Money Penny. These are contracts given to American people to go live in a country and spout bullshit. So, for example, when I retired, I was approached multiple times by people that got these kinds of contracts to go live in a foreign country and be paid, you know, a couple $100,000 to administer one of these programs. And basically it was either, you know, like transitioning for military, like their military people into civilian jobs, which was one of the programs that I headed up when I was on active duty for a period of time. I also did process reengineering. So they would have sent me into a foreign company as basically a quote unquote process engineer, which would have resulted in me spying on these companies and then them basically debriefing me of information that I found out on how they could thwart the competitiveness of that company with a US corporation. So as an American, I would have been paid with, let's just say the country was, I don't know, Ghana. And there was somebody over there threatening a US company from the inside of the country. And so I would be hired on a USAID contract to go over there, and it would have been listed as Ghana aid when all I'm doing is sabotaging the fucking country. All of these contracts generally do not go to the foreign country at all. They never see a penny of it. It goes to somebody in the United States or Europe on a contract to this country. Then it is coded as country aid, and it's to destroy the country.
Thank you.
Yeah, British does it too. A lot, as a matter of fact. Illini, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. I mean, one thing that folks, you know, listening in on this right now, what they can do, or even if you're on the fence about, actually, this is the perfect approach if you're on the fence, is when you see, you know, all of these, you know, elected representatives, people in the media and everything else panicking about Elon Musk getting into some database for a whole bunch of NGO and, you know, charity funding projects and how that's somehow bad. It's to simply, you know, ask the straight question, be the straight man, ask the question, basically, okay, so what's the big deal? I mean, okay, so some billionaire is, you know, basically gathering a whole bunch of financial data that, you know, a lot of this information is already in Charity Navigator. These are basically charities operating in foreign countries, allegedly. And he's having, you know, 4 meddling kids, like literally teenagers, help him. Why is everyone so worried about this being classified? The government always overclassifies everything. It's just a charity. What's the harm? And I think if people had that sort of a response, it really kind of drags them out and exposes them, you know, a little bit further. And I think it's a very reasonable question for anyone to ask. And this is something that we can help do to change the narrative over USA.
Correct. Thank you. SR71.
Thank you, Colonel. And of course, thank everybody for attending. Thank Bridget and Stellar for co-hosting. Perhaps this will help, Moneypenny. If you take a look at, just because it says USA and you see the word AID in there, doesn't mean we're here to help. It's U.S. Agency of International Development. And if you take Agency of International Development, you get one world order. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That really helps, because I was wondering about the acronym and wondering about whether it was aid as in aid, and whether, anyway, that has helped a lot, because obviously I've only ever seen it as a British person. I wouldn't have even heard of it, but I've only ever seen it from the perspective of my COVID stuff that I was investigating.
Yeah, we're not here to help in any way, shape, or form. Exactly. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, my experience, I just wanted to add what you said, Colonel. My experience is with NED, National Endowment for Democracy. They tried to infiltrate us at Occupy Wall Street, and we figured out that's who they were and ousted them. But what they do basically is they go in to foreign countries and find the rebels and give them a lot of money and support them, so that you know, they rise up and crush the government.
That's what they do.
Yeah. So, and I'm a little confused because intertwined, USAID and NED, but I think right now they're trying to say it's separate, but they're not. It's like the same thing.
Well,
it was to us.
They're as separate as the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, which means not at all, and the Carnegie Foundation and every other foundation. They all do the same thing. They just have to have a whole bunch of different hats in order to make it appear like, number one, like it's legitimate, and number two, in order to be able to cross utilize. So you can't do anything with just one thing in order to like launder money and all that other crap. You have to have multiple. It's like whack-a-mole. If they take one of us, we've got redundancy capability. They're all the same.
Yes, agreed. And I have to try to remember that and not get lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say was that quote unquote lefties are crying and whining about Elon being in the Treasury. And they're saying that he's going to get his hands on our social security number, and he's connected to China.
China already has everybody's social security number. They hacked OPM. That's what we were told.
Yeah, and he's connected to every country. He's providing his, satellite Wi-Fi effectively to pretty much every country going.
Yeah, exactly. Southern, go ahead.
Carolyn, and that correctly, the press secretary, she just read out for USA 2.5 million to DEI in Serbia, 70,000 for an Irish DEI musical, 47,000 on transgender operas in Colombia, 32,000 on a trans comic book in Peru. That's where our money's going for stupid stuff. But what I'm finding interesting is, and the gentleman was correct, this is all under this globalism, World Economic Forum, destroying the family, all this crap that brings down nations. And we missed the bullet, but that bullet's still coming. And we have to support Trump. We have to dig deep and get all this mess out, because if we don't root it out, and if Trump loses in 4 years, we will have lost everything that we thought we gained. So we have to continue to move forward. And I will say this, please reach out to your day to vote, to confirm Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, and RFK Jr. We need them. And they're being bombarded. They're getting 600 calls a minute on the main extension of the main line, the 202 number. But they're also on X, and they have email. We need our senators to get this through so that we can clean up healthcare, clean up the food, get our FBI back so we can start trusting in our government and our legal system. And these are important things. I don't know what your opinions on them, but I know I run around and I see a lot of familiar faces. We have to continue to push. The Democrats are in a disarray right now, and Chris Murphy said he was going to try to stall everything. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's not going to work. But that also wakes up the idea, will they continue to delay? And that is what we've got to manage this week. We've got to get this done. So thank you, and we'll drop down.
Sure. Bridget, go ahead.
One of the things, I just wanted to make sure everybody pretty much understands that when they say that these things were used to fund condoms in Gaza or bookcases in Uruguay, that's the line item note that is attached to the payment or program, or payment out of the program. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what it actually went for. That is what they're doing right now at a blush, is they're looking at what the line item note is on the payment. And they're generally not going to say for drug trafficking I don't know, to pollinate poppy fields, or to pay off someone's drug debt. And just keep that in mind as this information comes out, because it will be misleading when they say, okay, this was gone to condoms in Gaza. They weren't actually buying 50 million condoms for the people in Gaza. That was just the note that they put on that payment.
Well, but even if they did, that the way this works is they will overcharge the government. You know, you can buy a condom. I don't know. I've never bought one, but say it's 50 cents. They're going to charge $5 to the government, and they will buy the condoms. They will ship them because they have to do that in order for the audit, and they do audit these contracts. You have to actually have the shipping document that shows that you fulfilled that before you can actually come and get your paycheck. But the gross amount of money that is put in these, because they have to pay kickbacks to everybody, the person that gave them the contract, the politician that appropriated the money. There's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse that is built into these contracting vehicles on how this goes. And what you will find out, which is why I say someone has to, with an AI tool, actually start collating all of the awardees on these contracts, because what you're going to find out is they're shell companies owned by politicians themselves. You're going to find out that someone's wife or daughter or son-in-law or whatever owns the company that got the condom contract, and they actually only expended 50 cents per condom, but they charged the government $5 for it. And then where did the rest of that money go within that company? Well, it went to the politician. It went to a PAC that they run that then funded other politicians. That's kind of the way that whole thing works. So it's much bigger than what most people believe. And this is great that we're getting this information out, but you know what? I don't even give a shit about condoms, and I don't give a shit about gender studies. These people were foot soldiers under USAID to overthrow governments, and were kind of, to me, missing the entire evilness of this program by trying to focus on all of these minor bullshit things, because you lose the strategic picture. Not that we don't need to do that, we absolutely do, but someone needs to be out there putting the entire thing in context, and I've not seen anybody doing it except for us. Stellar, go ahead.
Well, I think that also helps fund some of the protests, because when you just said Bosnia, there were protests this week.
You shut yourself off, Stellar. Are you there? I think we lost Stellar. Don't bend the knee. Yeah, I'll take her down and bring her back up. Don't bend the knee. Go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I was going to give everybody my awakening on USA. I went on a humanitarian trip in Africa. I had to sign a NDA, so I won't say where in Africa or what organization we were with, but I bought some trucks, big trucks, and we were trucking rice, beans, and cooking oil into a war-torn area in Africa to feed the kids. And that's what I was there for, was to feed the women and children, right? And we set up a depot where we were transferring from big trucks to small trucks to distribute the food. And this is where my awakening happened. I thought I was doing a great thing. Well, one day the local military rolled in, and one of the guys that was with him, he was about 6'2", probably weighed 230, and he walked it, and you've seen this, I'm sure, Colonel. special forces, the way they move, the way they walk, it's just different. You
It
can
is.
tell the soldier whenever
Yep.
he's walking, right?
Yep.
So this guy gets out. Everybody else is wearing sandals or flip flops. You know, they got ragtag fatigues. This guy gets out. He's in black fatigues. He's got U.S. military issued combat boots, and he's bouncing as he walks. And you know, and he comes over and he says, "Hey, we're going to take 2 of those trucks. Need you to." One of them had rice, one of them had beans. We're going to throw some of your cooking oil on. We're taking 2 of these trucks. And I said, "No, sir, you ain't." I said, "I'm responsible for this. I've signed for it, and I've got to be held accountable for it. You're not taking it." He said, "Well, they had a technical Toyota truck, 50 caliber in the back." He said, "Well, I've got soldiers and weapons and you don't. So I'm taking 2 of your trucks and I'll bring them back. And tell you what, I'll even put diesel fuel in them for you." So they stole 2 trucks worth of rice, beans, and cooking oil. And I'm talking big dump trucks, tandem axle dump trucks. They were gone day and a half, and they brought my trucks back, and they brought me a 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel as well. So he was U.S. Special Forces, and he took that food that's supposed to go to women and children, and he fed the local militia with it. And that's whenever I said, okay, all I'm doing is supporting more bloodshed over here. I'm not doing what I thought God was leading me to come over here to do, so I'm out. So I was there for 3 months, was supposed to stay for 6, and I said, no, you know, I ain't going to have it on my conscience, you know, these 12-year-old boys being put into battle, and I'm over here supporting them. So, but whenever I come back, Colonel, I had missed one receipt, $37.46. I'll never forget it. I had to write the U.S. government a check for $37.46 because I was missing one receipt to account for the funds that USAID gave me.
Yeah.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
So anyway,
so
thank you, Colonel, for letting me speak.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that story, because you basically illustrated my point perfectly. The only thing that I will caution people, while I will 100% agree with you, he was SF trained, he likely was not on active duty at the time you saw him. He may have hired himself out to be a mercenary. I don't know that for a fact. None of us do. But that's the problem with this entire operation. They have turned our special forces people into mercenaries for the CIA because they co-opt the intelligence that they give to special operators to go out and do these missions. But in addition to that, the CIA, you know how like U.S. The military air ops people that are trained to be pilots are like a feeder for airlines. So it's very difficult. They've always had a tough time keeping career Air Force, Marine, Navy, Army pilots because they can go make a lot more money at major airlines. The Special Forces is a feeder for the CIA Operation Gladio covert operations and their subsidiaries like Blackwater and all these other mercenary units. Because you go from being an enlisted guy that's a sharpshooter assassin, being paid, you know, maybe with benefits $40,000 as an E4, E5 on the end of your first enlistment, and you can go hire yourself out to these guys for $250,000 a year. And they go over there and do shit like Don't Bend the Knee just illustrated to you. And they are trained to use deadly force to do it. So just keep that in mind. Kathy, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Hi, everybody. So today online, I had a really sciencey guy who was saying that because of the USAID delay in payments, that, you know, if we get attacked, that it would likely be Trump's fault. And I wrote back that, you know, I feel like for the last 4 years, open border, and so likely if something were to happen, like we're here already. So then right after that, I saw your post on the Rahm Emanuel thread.
Mhm.
I mean, and that's totally a threat. Like I literally stopped what I was doing, looked at TV, and like I chilled. Like, oh, that dude just absolutely totally threatened us. So my response back was, well, I guess I'm glad we're armed. That was my only retort on that. I wanted to find out what your thoughts were on that. If that was just like something he was throwing out there, or if you thought that was indeed something.
The Rahm Emanuel? What Rahm Emanuel said?
Yeah.
Oh no, they don't throw anything out just because. That 100% was a threat. That's what they do. Tim, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Colonel. I want to thank you for letting me give me a pair of Gladio glasses to watch this come out, this news over the weekend. But I got a theory. I'm going to share it with you. I think the U.S. aid is like a remedial class. It's just a warm up, and it's to get the public's mind around, the concept of corruption and all this backhanded stuff they've been doing. I heard a number today that USAID was less than 1% of the federal budget. Well, that's a lot, but this is nothing compared to when they get inside the Treasury. So everybody just sit back. Let's get this remedial class underway. We're fixing to get serious meat and potatoes.
Well said, Tim. Well said. Southern, go ahead.
Just real quick, talking about, to Colonel's point, Bolsonaro would still be president today in Brazil. I was it was like 2:00 in the morning. We were able to get on the call with him and his son, who speaks better English, what was going on. And he talked about all the censorship, and ironically, Mike Benz is talking about it. So I found it and pulled it up. USAID censorship funding and NED's censorship operational network, there would still have been free internet in Brazil. And if that was in place, Bolsonaro would still be the rightfully elected president. His son may run. We're not sure yet. They're in that process. But Bolsonaro is sort of having to hide himself. This is the impact. They took over a country to change who got elected by censorship and having an operational network. That's Brazil. I have to believe, Colonel Tower, this is in a ton of countries.
We've proven that it's in a ton of countries.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. And we're naive if we don't know that's happening here.
Well, it's definitely happening here. We watched it with our own eyes.
Absolute.
All right. Anybody else got anything?
I'll bite. Colonel, Don't Bend the Knee raised an interesting point about mission, about how he was on a mission trip there. Gladio has done some stuff with that too, including I think the Rockefellers, and you covered that with Thy Will Be Done.
Yep.
That book. The more ironic thing is that some of the people who worked in the Moody Bible Institute's trust department, if you take a look at their obituaries, over the past 10 years, they'll say that they were ex-CIA operatives in the 1950s before they got involved with Moody Bible. And guess where Moody Bible banked? It was at Continental Bank with David Kennedy. And then if you want to do the link analysis there, that takes you all the way back to Vatican Bank. And
explain to everybody how you get to the Vatican Bank from Continental.
That was Cardinal
Marcinicus.
I forget I don't know the cardinal's name on the top of my head.
Marcinkus.
Marcinkus. Okay, you got Marcinkus, but then you've also got there was the Italian cardinal too. But yeah, it's look, the Catholics and Moody Bible are certainly two separate entities, but
both being used by the same Gladio operatives. Moody comes up repeatedly in Thy Will Be Done, using them as a front for CIA operations, just like Wycliffe did in the use of the Summer Institute of Language. The CIA infiltrates everything. And you're right, Illini. That was one of the most bulging moments for me, is to know that the mafia and the Vatican Church in Chicago were basically in bed together, banking at the same bank, which the CIA uses for their operations that are being done within Moody. Because think about it, sending missionaries, as you just pointed out, all over the world to bring them back in and debrief them on what they saw, what things happened. It gives an excuse for those CIA operatives to visit the quote unquote missionaries out in the field for oversight. It's the perfect setup. And you can put them anywhere doing anything because it's all in God's name. And then you have
everybody involved. They thought they were doing the right thing. I'm sure even the CIA operatives, in most cases, probably thought that they were doing the right thing. But if you peel the onion all the way back, it gets interesting really fast.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far. I don't think any of the CIA thinks they're doing the right thing, but that's just me. I'm jaded at this point. But then Marcinkus ends up as basically what they call the Secretary of State, the IOR over at the Vatican, basically in charge of the Vatican Bank. And so you have the guy that's basically in bed with the mafia in Chicago, banking with the mafia, CIA, blah, blah, blah. And then he ends up being the one selected to run the Vatican Bank and Operation Gladio, as the years of lead unfold in Italy, funding a whole bunch and doing all the money laundering for the drug networks and the Vatican Bank. And then you have what's his face, whose name I can never remember, that ends up hanging off the bridge from Bank of Ambrosia, who was one of their money laundering partners with the Vatican Bank, in a quote unquote suicided situation that they later decided was murder, which was obviously murder the day it happened. It's, again, this story, this history is stranger than any fiction book you could ever write. Is that right, Illini?
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, the graph of all the connections. I mean, everybody's going to have to probably go back to the Paradise Papers a few more times, for all of this. I mean, that would be an interesting look too. But just the connections, just from the 1970s on all these different organizations and the financing for them, and how everybody kind of banked in the same places. It gets. And how that now we're finding out today that like a lot of these people were CIA operatives. It's just fascinating. I mean, having been in Chicago and having seen these organizations from the outside and everything, and then sort of to come back and to find more information and more context on everything. It's just. I mean, it is a bit of a shock. It
is. No. Yes, that's a great way of putting it. It is a shock, especially me, who, like you, I spent 30 years, not that you were in the military, but you spend your entire life thinking one thing, and then you find out that basically everything that you thought was a lie, and you're like, your mind's blown. So anyway, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. One is we went after the Catholic Church in New York City because they own a lot of land that was given to them by the fucking Queen of England. And the plainclothes fuckers came out strong at us for that. They weren't allowing one step into the land of the Catholic Church. And the other thing is that Samantha Powers the angel of death, so known, her husband is a psychopath too. And he invented this theory, you know, while he's working at Harvard, called nudge. And basically, it is an idea of if people don't do what you want, you just kick them.
Well, nudge them, yes. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else got anything? All right.
Are you going to be on the pond tonight? Do you know?
The pond is on tonight. I've already reposted, and I also put the link down in the bottom. I think golfing is busy right now, so that's why he didn't say anything. But yes, definitely tonight.
Okay. All right. I will be there. Part of it I may have to do while I am driving because I have to go pick up my husband at the airport. So I want to tell you guys a little story and then I got to go just because we're family now. So little personal story. In 1987, after years of working to get my bachelor's degree, because again, you guys have heard my story. Very poor, enlisted in the Air Force to go to college, went to school at night for years and years and years. In 1985, I got a scholarship to finish the last 2 years at Indiana University, graduated in 87, got my commission, went on active duty that fall, October 17th. Of course, I still remember the date. And I went out to Los Angeles Air Force Base on my first duty assignment as a second lieutenant and saved a whole bunch of money because I was getting paid way more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. And I bought my first brand new car. And that car was a Toyota Supra. It was a 1989 all white, blue interior, like that crushed velour. And it had white wheels. And I absolutely loved that car. So I drove that car everywhere. I mean, it had a lot of miles on it. I drove that car from Los Angeles to New York on my way to Italy, across country. We had lots of friends, going to see everybody, stopping to see family, blah, blah, blah. Put that car on a boat, and it came over to Italy with me, and I drove that car literally all over Europe. I drove it from the bottom of Italy up the eastern side of Italy through Austria, Germany, over to see my cousin in Holland, back down through Belgium, Switzerland, you name it. I went everywhere in Europe in this car. And so eventually my now ex-husband decided to cheat, and we got a divorce. During the divorce, he had never driven the car ever. By this time, it's 2001. So I've had this car, you know, pretty much the entire time we were married. And he had to have that car in the divorce, only because he knew how much that car meant to me. And that was fine. I wanted a divorce desperately, so I would have given probably my right arm at that point. But just the spitefulness of it was very devastating to me. In addition to dealing with the emotional trauma of going through a divorce, I had 2 little kids, like a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. The entire thing was just totally traumatic. And so, but my lawyer, who was a previous JAG officer, said that if he's fixated on this, let him have the car. He hasn't even said anything about your retirement. And my retirement, of course, he was entitled to half of it, but he was too fucking stupid to even realize that. And so my retirement was significantly more than his. And he, in being petty, he missed the big thing, which is great for me. So my husband, who is the best husband in the whole entire world, for the last several years, unbeknownst to me, has been looking for a Toyota Supra for me. And he found one the other day in Long Island, New York. And he told me yesterday that he was flying up to Long Island, New York to buy me a Toyota Supra that is a year newer than mine with 60 original miles that is owned by a doctor up there. And he called me this morning. He's already got it on a truck, and it's already headed to Florida. It will be here in 2 days. So I have to go pick him up at the airport tonight because he's flying back tonight. He was going to drive the car back, but there was a whole issue with the tag, and the guy wanted to like partially register it in New York. And I'm like, it's not going to be partially registered in our name in New York. So just put it on a truck and bring it home. So that's what he's doing. So I have to go over, I have to meet him at 11:15 at the Orlando airport. So we will definitely be on the pond, some of which may be in the car, but I cannot tell you guys how excited I am. So of course, tomorrow I'm going to be posting well, not tomorrow, sorry. I think it's due here Thursday to be delivered. So we will be posting pictures, if not video. And I cannot tell you how excited I am. I needed to pick me up, and that definitely did it.
Husband ever. Just saying.
He is
He's a keeper. He's a keeper.
He is the best husband ever. Absolutely.
I'm jealous.
I would be too. Yep. So anyway, just wanted to share that with you guys. I think we're all family now. And super excited. So I will see you guys tonight. Let me go over the calendar and see if we've got, okay, so that's today. And then I have, so I am going to be on a podcast tomorrow at 3:30, which we will not be here. I will have a space, but it's going to be later than the 4 o'clock. And so I'll just have to play that by ear, probably around 6, potentially 5:36, something like that, depending on how long this podcast goes on. And I will send you guys the details of this particular podcast. It's with a guy by the name of Jay Scott. Okay. Then, of course, we have on Wednesday, Alpha Warrior. Then on Thursday, we have our War Hamster video podcast. And on, let's see. And I think I have one, I think on the, where's that other one? Yeah, on the 9th, Sunday, I will be on Matt Errett's show. And we're going to talk a little bit more about all of the background on JFK. And it goes along with the thread that I'm doing right now on JFK. He does his own show separate from Ghosts of Base Patrick Henry. And so I'm going to be on his show at 2 o'clock on Sunday. And I will send you guys the details of that when I get it as well. So that's it for the week. I'm going to jump off here and grab something to eat, and then I'll be back on the pond.
Before you go, can I say something?
Sure.
I just wanted to give you all, you have a great hubby, by the way. Heads up, it just happened a little bit ago, but he said he was going to do it, our president, and he did. He shut down the Department of Education.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Our kids are going to win big now.
Yep, that's awesome.
It's all about the children, right?
Yep.
That gave me goosebumps. I have been praying for this. Oh.
Victory.
Yep. That's awesome. All right. Well, that's a good note to close on then. Cool. Take care, guys. See you tonight. All right. Let me jump back over here and see what we got over here. I'm eager to see you on Eric Hunley's channel. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. Colonel's going to be a schoolgirl at the prom tomorrow. Yeah, probably Thursday, but I definitely will be. Absolutely. That's fucking awesome. Thank you, Donnie Vision. I think so too. Super excited. Roberto Calvi. Thank you, SR71. That's the one. What happened to my screen? It just went blank. Did y'all's screen go blank? What the heck? Rumble's going to start screwing up too now. Oh my gosh. All right. Let me, and then it just like knocked out all the whole chat. But Roberto Calvi, thank you, SR71, for putting that in there. All right. Take care, guys. Mine is fine. Yeah. See, my whole computer screen just went black. Anyway, I got to run. Got to do dinner. Take care. See you guys soon.